Chapter 17. Embrace continuous learning. Understanding is not the same as doing. People tend to realize quite early on, mind you, that they'll never be a pro athlete. Many of the dads aggressively coaching their kid from the sidelines at a children's baseball game could probably tell you something about that. Just because we know how to dribble a ball doesn't mean we'll become anywhere close to being good enough for the world stage, despite putting in hours of practice. We know that hard work is no guarantee of success. I am 5'6", and it's going to be damn hard for me to become a pro basketball player, no matter how much practice I put in. But when it comes to learning or creativity, we think it's different. We tend to think that once we understand how something works intellectually, we've got it. We would know what to do going forward. But being a business professor will not make us a good manager, and being a financial commentator will not make us a good hedge fund manager. When Zhuge went to Northern Wu to convince the emperor to join his conquest against Kaio, he criticized its people and rulers for being knowledgeable and intelligent about the science and the arts, but possessing no concept of how to apply the principles to reality. They chose to engage in endless discussion without knowing how to translate what they were discussing into reality. We can't allow ourselves to be armchair strategists, learning from reading books alone. We have to try and apply the principles we learn. This trap is so common that there's a term for it in Chinese, discussing tactics on paper. Suffice to say, progress will undoubtedly be slow, and will face a number of wrong turns, which will constantly leave us feeling the pain of failing and not understanding, over and over again. But if we stick with it long enough, if we pay enough attention to the little details of how life is improving, it will turn out to be our greatest source of never-ending strength. Some things in life we can see and feel very concretely, like objects. Other things are more abstract, like ideas and concepts. We'll never be able to interact with these abstract things, but they are nevertheless just as real as the objects we can hold in our hands. Even though ideas cannot be touched and grasped, it does not make them any less important. A leader must be able to deal with both. They must understand both the physical world and the world of ideas, and be able to switch comfortably between the two if they are to become someone who can lead their followers into the unknown. In the I Ching, the Book of Changes, a god is someone who can predict the future. But it's not a magical skill conferred by the divine. It comes from the down-to-earth and mundane ability to connect the dots through the experience and insights collected over one's lifetime. I hope that one day you will be able to remove the phrase "I've never thought of that before" from your vocabulary, or at least get as close as possible. You'll be at a place where you're constantly seeing new connections and situations from new angles. Use history as a shortcut. In his book of philosophy, Zheng Guofan writes about two different types of leaders, a skilled leader and a brilliant leader. A skilled leader is someone who has great foresight, someone who is able to predict every move of the enemy. But a brilliant leader is someone who is also able to win over their enemies. Someone who can attract and assimilate an enemy into helping their cause, incorporating their strengths into their own. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, vision and foresight aren't attributes that can come from innate talent. Rather, they're skills that have to be learned over time. But luckily, we're not starting from scratch. What do you do when you plan for your next holiday? Do you start with a blank piece of paper? You could do that, but it wouldn't be very effective. What you're probably going to do instead is look for inspiration. You would do some research online and read the reviews and highlights of places written by other people. Life is the same. Use history and the experience of others as a platform. Everything grows like a tree, from its roots to its branches. Before we can go upwards, we must first extend our network of roots in the soil. Bamboo can hide deep underground, building its intricate roots for years before exploding magnificently upwards at a rate of almost 1 inch every 40 minutes. Isn't this amazing? What could give us more confidence about life than knowing that all experiences, the good and the bad, are giving us the nutrients we need to grow? If we truly took this to heart, we could be brave with the courage to behave differently. What are our roots? Well, they're partly our own life experience, but they're also the life experience of everyone who came before us. We can learn to avoid the traps they've fallen into, and we can learn not to repeat their mistakes. When the Manchurians conquered China proper in the 1800s, the leaders worried about how they would rule over China's vast lands. They worried about a potential mass uprising from the much larger Chinese population. As compared to China, Manchuria was a young speck on the world map. Manchuria was also less culturally developed, as the Chinese had the benefit of their 3,000-year history. The new leaders tasked a Chinese historian to write a book for them. They wanted the historian to describe why each dynasty prospered and why each inevitably fell. The intent was for these lessons to form the founding philosophy of the new ruling class of Manchurians in China. The exact contents of the book have since been lost, but we know of the book because it was the starting point for the family rules of the royal family. The founders of the Qing dynasty studied the history of China and codified it into a series of rules and philosophies that generations of emperors would have to follow and pass on to their sons. One interesting family rule was that the emperor could only sleep with one of his wives each night. Despite the emperor's house being famous for having over 3,000 concubines, even the emperor himself could not do with them as he pleased. The impetus behind this rule was to restrain the emperor from losing himself in days of lust and desire, leaving the dynasty in ruin. This is interesting because I had often imagined emperors being able to do whatever they wanted. They were supposed to be at the top of the food chain. But that was not the case. Their lives were dictated by innumerous spiritual and family rules, set to prevent the abuse of power and to ensure that these rulers would not repeat the failings of previous leaders. These rules were passed on from generation to generation, with each emperor adding to the wisdom of the emperors before them. Similarly, the beginning of our plan should be where another plan ends. We should leverage the work, knowledge, and experience of the people before us and incorporate it into our own thinking. This is precisely the reason why after thousands of years we're still reading and learning from Sun Tzu, because we're hoping to build our knowledge off the culmination of centuries of human inquisitiveness and catastrophe. Don't just watch from the sidelines. Toward the end of the Shang dynasty, there reigned an extremely intelligent and physically strong king, King Zhu. Apparently, he was so strong that could fight wild animals and boars with his bare hands. Unfortunately, he used his wit and strength to overpower the people around him. He ignored the advice and counsel of his ministers. He silenced anyone who spoke against him, and he embarrassed people around him to prove that they were wrong. He had the heart ripped from one of his most loyal advisers, Began, because he didn't appreciate the counsel he gave. He said, "Everyone says that it is because of your special heart that you have become the great person that you are. I would like to see it for myself." Began was known to have an anomaly with his heart. No one dared counsel King Zhu after that, not that he would listen anyway. "I am destined by God to rule as emperor, and nobody can take this away from me," he said. Instead of using his skill and talents to create a bright future, he was complacent and arrogant. "What's the difference between someone who's alive and someone who's dead?" Well, when you touch the muscles of someone alive, they feel responsive and elastic, but when you squeeze the muscles of a corpse, they feel cold and rigid. The lesson from this Chinese riddle is that we have to treat life and what we do with a degree of elasticity. Jeff Bezos said, "We're stubborn on the vision, but we're flexible on the details." Our third-party seller business is an example of that. It took us 3 tries to get the third-party seller business to work. We didn't give up. If you're not stubborn, you'll give up on experiments too soon. And if you're not flexible, you'll pound your head against the wall and you won't see a different solution to a problem you're trying to solve. Dealing with change is the underlying philosophy behind all of Sun Tzu's work, whether it's trying to change our physical circumstances on the battlefield or creating a supportive environment for our cause. It all comes down to our ability to adapt to change. A leader draws strength from knowing that losing is nothing out of the ordinary. The most important factor is that they're able to learn from it and use the experience as inspiration in the future. When I was in high school, I was struggling with my advanced math classes and at risk of failing the subject. Feeling frustrated and confused, I asked my teacher what I should do. Should I drop the subject? My teacher said there's never been a boxer from outside of the ring. You should continue and at least take the exam. If you don't try, you won't be giving yourself a chance for success. If you take the exam and fail, you'll nevertheless have gained experience that can help you walk further down the path in the future. I listened to my teacher that day, and my math results turned out to be the best out of them all. In ancient China, people who were well educated were entitled to become military officers or ministry officials. It set them apart from the rest of the populace because they were well read and could write in the styles of famous poets and artists from history. With education came wealth and power. So for these elites, life was good. They had made it. However, Sun Tzu stressed that learning had to continue throughout a person's life. We couldn't put our self-development on hold just because we had attained a particular rank or societal status. He said, just because you can see the sun and the moon doesn't mean you have good eyes because everyone else can see them too. Just because you can hear thunder doesn't mean you have good ears because anyone with a pair of ears can hear them too. But the learning Sun Tzu was referring to was different from the learning we're used to doing. When we're young, our learning is focused around developing competency. It's focused on transferring knowledge to help us to develop a skill. Education helps us to become functioning contributors to society. As an adult, you, for the most part, already have these foundational skills. Even if you were to enter a new field or industry, learning new technical skills would represent a relatively short part of your overall career. As we mature and become more skilled at what we do, the learning we need isn't around performing tasks, but rather around developing our decision-making muscle. Our learning should be focused on how to make the most appropriate choices. Around the year 211 A.D., after Liu Bei had lost yet another battle, Liu Bei fled with his army westward from present-day Sichuan. During the frenzy of the retreat, one of his lead commanders, Zhang Fei, suddenly took his soldiers off into another direction. Liu Bei's soldiers shouted, "Look! Zhang Fei has abandoned us. What do we do now?" But Liu Bei quickly retorted, "Quiet! He has not abandoned us. Him leaving so suddenly must mean that there is something extremely important to do." Liu Bei's instincts were correct. Zhang Fei had found out that the enemy had captured Liu Bei's son, and he went to try and rescue him. Liu Bei was later asked, "How did you know that Zhang Fei had left for an important mission, and not because he wanted to abandon you?" Liu Bei replied, "Zhang Fei and I are brothers in arms, forged under the gaze of the gods. He would not abandon me. When Zhang Fei started fighting for me, I was in a much worse condition and lost many more battles. But now, although I'm still losing battles, I am doing much better than before, so why would he wait so long to leave now?" Of course, the truth was probably somewhere in the second part of his response, but nevertheless, it did show Liu Bei's skill in appraising situations with such clarity, even in the midst of chaos. Destroying the bridge. On the run from Cayo at the Battle of Changban, Liu Bei's army hastily crossed a small bridge, clumsily, but nevertheless without incident. Before the enemy could follow, Zhang Fei, one of Liu Bei's most fierce and intimidating generals, shouted, "I am Zhang Fei! Who dares proceed any further?" and knocked an enemy officer off his horse. Cayo said, "That commander must be a great general, so dangerous that even the horses are afraid of him. Let us find another way." As Cayo turned to find another path, Zhang Fei ordered his troops to dismantle the bridge. He then raced to the front of the army to excitedly tell Liu Bei what had happened. "I scared them away. With one battle cry, I made Cayo run away like a coward. And when they left, I destroyed the bridge so they could not follow us." Liu Bei was not impressed. "You should not have dismantled the bridge. By removing it, you have signaled to the enemy that we have no reinforcements coming to help us. You have told them that we only have a limited number of troops in the area. Cayo has a large army at his disposal. He could easily construct 10 other bridges if he wanted to. There was no point in destroying it." Zhang Fei tried to come up with a rebuttal, but he was speechless. A short time later, Kaio did just that. He returned to the area and built a new bridge during the night to catch up. Not everyone is worthy of being your enemy. A worthy opponent isn't someone with necessarily the same skills as you. It's someone who has the wisdom and experience to be able to see the same things as you. We know that Liu Bei was the real enemy of Kaio, but Zhang Fei, despite being a great general, was never a match for Kaio. Zhang Fei never had as much vision or foresight as either Kaio or Liu Bei. Compare this to Liu Bang's praise of Xiao He, who was his chief administrator during his uprising. When Liu Bang was rewarding officers for helping him build his empire, he gave Xiao He the greatest proportion of rewards. Several generals strongly objected, arguing that because Xiao He was never directly involved in battles, he didn't deserve any of the loot. Liu Bang said, "If my servants used cats to catch mice, who do you think had contributed the most to my goals? My servants or my cats? Xiao He, he said, should receive the highest credit because he had planned the overall strategy in the war against Xiangyu. If you can't see more than others, or if your thoughts and insights are not deeper than the insights of your opponent, then you have no chance for victory." In 1969, Lawrence J. Peter wrote about the Peter Principle, the notion that people in a hierarchy tend to rise to their level of incompetence. People are promoted within an organization until they find themselves in a position for which they are no longer competent. They don't perform in their new roles because what made them successful in the past is not helping them to perform any further. A manager who is great at executing his boss's ideas won't find any luck when they're the one who has to generate the ideas. Good followers don't always become good leaders. These people are infamously known as middle management, a kind of managerial graveyard for people who can't climb any further upwards, but also can't find a way down. In his book, Peter cheekily describes his solution of creative incompetence, where you pretend to be incompetent while you're still employed to avoid additional promotions. Definitely an interesting solution. The lesson is that the learning never ceases, and it needs to be continuous. Don't be seduced by the complacency to continue what you've been doing in the past because it's easy. Think about where you're going and not where you've been. I get it. We may not have been tasked with these responsibilities in the past, or we might not have had the opportunities to learn, but it really doesn't matter. Take accountability today for finding creative ways to push toward the kind of person you need to be next. In my 20s, I worked for a strong and opinionated leader who had risen quite rapidly in the ranks to a senior position. Unfortunately, being strong and opinionated sometimes also makes you a strong micromanager. To be successful on her team, you had to think of yourself as an extension of her mind and body. It didn't pay to have original thoughts if they didn't gel with hers. She would ask for your views, but always knew that in the end, her own ideas would prevail. Over the years, I watched as people within the team changed the way they behaved to suit her preferences. Over time, we gave up a piece of who we were. We gradually lost our desire for intellectual thought, and we forfeited the thirst for our own creativity and expression. I'm no longer with that team, but I heard that she was removed from her post to a new role with significantly reduced responsibility. My old team apparently stayed on to help her, partly, I suspect, because they didn't know where else to go. I always think about this experience when I need a little motivation to keep on going. We can never rest on our laurels, even when life is good or when life is fine. We gotta hustle. I think it's easier for people to understand the need for learning when it's a technical subject like science or math. In the modern workplace, this might be equivalent to learning about artificial intelligence or how to code. It's more difficult to pick up the topics Sun Tzu requires us to master, like understanding how events might connect together or how to influence teams. And when we add the practical constraints of our jobs and who we work for, we might start to appreciate why some people never build the wisdom they need to. Unfortunately, our decision-making can't be improved by reading more books. It's not the same type of learning as understanding concepts. It will only come from the small but gradual effort we put into paying attention to the smallest details of our lives and observing the impact of our decisions. Believe that anyone can do it. I've always found it fascinating to read about all the stories of ordinary people rising to become leaders of entire empires. How does this happen? Lu Bang, for example, was particularly adept at understanding and building a strong relationship with people. He knew how to interact with folks and could foresee the outcomes that would come from a meeting between the minds. He knew how people would react to every word he said. Was that why he could rise to become the emperor? Growing up, Lu Bang enjoyed being a small-time local officer of the village he was raised in. He enjoyed playing host and taking care of his friends. He was very generous to his friends, often serving them meals and showing them a good time. Unfortunately, his position didn't pay very well. Given his limited resources, the resourceful Lu Bang frequently invited his friends to his brother's house, where his sister-in-law would help to cook and entertain his guests. But, of course, Lu Bang never contributed anything to his brother's farm, nor did he try to repay him. He continued to invite people over until the night his sister-in-law couldn't take it anymore. That night, as Lu Bang was entertaining his guests at his brother's house as usual, his sister-in-law was cooking unusually loudly. She banged pots and pans together while cooking, letting the men outside the kitchen know how displeased she was. Lu Bang's friends took the cue and politely excused themselves for the evening. Lu Bang stormed off angrily, feeling extremely embarrassed. Years later, after Lu Bang became emperor, everyone in his family received riches and prestigious titles as a reward, that is, all except his sister-in-law's son. Lu Bang's father thought that he had forgotten to reward him, but Lu Bang said, "I have not forgotten. I just don't think that my sister-in-law was a good role model, so I do not think she deserves a reward." Lu Bang's father scolded him and persuaded him to give his nephew a title because it was the right thing to do. Lu Bang eventually relented and gave his nephew a title, the equivalent of the Duke of Pots. When historians write about Lu Bang, they praise him for being able to see and handle things from the right perspective. They write that he had a big heart and was a generous character. But I wouldn't say the story above was an example of his generous character. When it came to personal matters, he was petty and close-minded. But here's the punchline: Lu Bang was no different from you or me. He had to go through his own period of growth, as will you. He was both close-minded and open-minded. He learned how to grow from someone who was arguably worse than your ordinary man into a great ruler. His empire came from his own experience and reflection, not birthright.